Our faith is built like a tower, one piece at a time.
We stack ideas on top of each other with the best of intentions, as best as we know how.
But as we grow up, our lives change, and we face new challenges that can shake our faith.
It makes us wonder, does my faith still apply to my life today?
How do I keep following God when it feels like He isn't there for me?
Can I still be part of a church after the things that were done or said to me?
What do I do with my doubts and unanswered questions? We find pieces that don't fit like we thought they did.
Our faith, which used to feel solid, now feels unstable.
Just one piece away from everything falling apart.
What do we do when our faith is shaken?
Deconstruction. Have you heard of it? Maybe you've heard of it in cooking, like a deconstructed chicken pot pie. It's like taking the ingredients of a dish and separating them out. So in a chicken pot pie, you're going to have the insides of the pie in the bowl and the pastry on the side. Or maybe you've heard of deconstructing a building, where you carefully take apart a building, preserving the things that you want to save, as opposed to demolition, where you just destroy it all. If you Google the word deconstruction and you scroll down, it's not long before you see the word deconstruction used in combination with the word faith. Google calls it a deconstruction movement, and it's a thing, particularly in America. Embracing the process of deconstructing faith is the purpose of this series. See, faith does not exist without doubt. Faith and doubt, they're dependent on each other. Faith chooses to believe in spite of doubt. And because doubt is required for faith to be real, sometimes it feels like our faith is teetering on this thin line between doubt and belief. And when we get hurt by the church, or when we see Christians behave in unloving ways, when the church as an institution behaves badly, when Christian leaders fall, abuse, or misuse power, when we equate faith with politics, or when we see faith used as a tool to control and manipulate people, well, understandably, our faith is shaken. Or when we have hope for God to save us or our loved one from the horrible diagnosis, and He doesn't. Or we lose the job even though we did nothing wrong, or we can't seem to make it financially no matter how hard we try, or nothing about following Jesus seems to be what you signed up for. Our faith is shaken. And when this happens, it's time to deconstruct. So for the purpose of this series, we are using this definition of deconstruction. Deconstruction is an evaluation of our core beliefs, taking away everything that's not true and leaving us with a faith that is real. Deconstruction, it's personal, and it often hits close to home. We've all either gone through this, or we're going through it, or we know someone who's going through this. But even though this is an experience that many of us can relate to, for some reason, it feels kind of scary to talk about. We don't want to admit our doubts, question our faith, or tell others we're struggling because, well, these conversations, they don't always feel safe. We don't always feel seen or understood. But sociologists suggest that about 62% of people have at least one faith crisis in their lifetime. But they can only measure those who admit that, so I think the percentage is probably higher than that. In this series, we're going to acknowledge deconstruction as part of the faith journey. So once again, for this series, our definition is this. Deconstruction is an evaluation of our core beliefs, taking away everything that's not true and leaving us with a faith that is real. But I think it's important to remember that deconstruction is not deconversion. Nope. Deconversion is when someone chooses to no longer have faith. Their doubts win and their faith doesn't. Deconstruction is also not selfish. Part of self-care and self-respect is to know yourself, to understand your doubts, and to admit them. And doing this work will not only benefit you, but will also benefit everyone around you. Deconstruction is also not an excuse to treat other people badly. In other words, it's not an excuse to sin. It's not an excuse to criticize people. Nope, sorry, it's not that. Deconstruction is also not something to be afraid of. A real faith is an examined faith. So pushing away doubts and not talking about them or dealing with them, it keeps our faith so shallow, and unexamined faith is not as real as it could be. And finally, deconstruction, it's certainly not something new. Let's take a look at Peter's journey, a journey of doubt, disillusionment, and deconstruction. See, Peter was one of Jesus' 12 closest friends while he was on earth. He was one of the 12 disciples that Jesus did life with, but not only that, he was one of the inner three, those very closest to Jesus. And during his last meal on earth with his disciples, Jesus and Peter have this conversation. Jesus is telling the whole table, he's saying this very night, all of you will fall away on account of me. And then Peter speaks up and he replies, hey, even if all the other people fall away, I never will. And Jesus says, truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. In that moment, Peter was so committed to Jesus, so very certain about what he knew. He could never imagine betraying him. But what Peter couldn't see was the events that would unfold that very same night. Jesus would go to the garden and pray, and while he was there, a large crowd armed with swords came and arrested him. And the disciples, they attempted to fight back, but Jesus told them, put the sword away. And then all of Jesus' disciples deserted him and fled. Jesus was taken in, he was questioned, he was accused of blasphemy and deemed worthy of death. While all this is happening to Jesus, Peter's outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl asked him if he was with Jesus. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then another said, this man was with Jesus. And Peter said, I don't know the man. And after a while, those standing near Peter said again, surely you are one of them. And Peter said a third time, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crows. Now, before we evaluate what's going on here with Peter, let's look at some things we know about Peter. He was the first one to answer Jesus' question, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. When the disciples were afraid for their lives because a storm was brewing and they were on a boat, Peter was the first and only to get out of the boat and walk on the water with Jesus. And that night in the garden, when Jesus was praying and he got arrested, Peter was the one who raised the sword to defend Jesus. He was so sure. He was outspokenly sure. And then he denied knowing Jesus at all. Now, all the times that I've read this story, I've heard other people talk about this story, I always assumed that Peter denied knowing Jesus because he was afraid. He was afraid for his own life. He was afraid he might too be arrested and killed. But I'm also wondering, after this remarkable turn of events, when Peter and the others expected Jesus to lead a rebellion, to usher in a new way, to take over political power, to be their conquering king. And instead, Jesus submits to arrest. Jesus says, put that sword away. What if in this moment, Peter's answering these questions, aren't you with him? With a sincere, I don't even know him. He's not who I thought he was going to be. He's not doing what I thought he was going to do. And in this moment, Peter doubts Jesus. He doubts his power. He doubts his identity. He doubts his ability to do what he said he was going to do. Peter doubts that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And in this moment, Peter's disappointed. He's disillusioned, and his faith is shaken. Peter had confused his construction of who he thought Jesus was with who Jesus really was. And it's not that Jesus got it wrong, or his choices to submit rather than fight back are wrong. No, Jesus wasn't wrong. Peter got Jesus wrong. And this is exactly where deconstruction begins. And there's a moment like this for most of us in our journey of faith. What do we do in the moment where our doubts are loud and our faith is truly shaken? I think the first thing we can do is we can examine what we have believed. We ask ourselves, what do I believe for myself? Not what others believe, not what I've been told to believe. What do I believe for myself? Peter had decided that he believed that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God. And how did Peter come to that belief? Well, he had encountered Jesus. He saw miracles. He witnessed the hope and peace that Jesus brought to others. And he eventually witnessed that hope and peace that Jesus brought to himself. And as a result of these encounters, Peter made some assumptions about Jesus, which leads to the next step of working our way through deconstruction. We identify our false ideas of Jesus. See, Peter had decided that Jesus was the Son of God. So, of course, he had some ideas about how that was going to play out. He may have believed that Jesus would be the earthly ruler that would save the people from the oppressive Roman political climate of their day. He may have believed that Jesus would come in power in an earthly way and make everything better for everyone like that. And Peter was on board with that. He was ready to fight and lose his life for that. What Peter was not expecting was for Jesus to submit himself to arrest and ultimately submit himself to death. No fighting back, no war breaking out, no overthrowing the corrupt power structure. None of that. Jesus submits. And that caused Peter to doubt. When we have doubts, we can ask ourselves, what am I believing about Jesus that is not true? What is happening around me that I didn't expect, and how is it shaking my faith? Write it down. Share it with a friend. And third, we seek to understand the truth about Jesus. See, after Peter's denial of Jesus, he is like questioning if Jesus was indeed the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then the rooster crows, and he begins to realize, wait, that's exactly what Jesus said was going to happen. And if he's right about this, what else is he right about? Wait, where did I get Jesus wrong? And over the next few days and weeks, Peter would encounter Jesus again and again in a new way, in a resurrected way. After Jesus rises from the dead, there are 10 different recorded accounts of Jesus appearing to his disciples. And Peter begins to put away his ideas of who he wanted Jesus to be, who he hoped and expected Jesus to be. And he begins to embrace who Jesus really is, the resurrected Christ, the one who beats death, the one who ascends into heaven before his very eyes. And when we face our deconstruction moment, we can go back and discover who Jesus is. We can encounter him again. And this is the beauty of our walk with God. Like Peter, we have stages. Peter meets Jesus. Peter is first introduced to Jesus by his brother, and Jesus calls Peter by his name, Simon. And in that moment, he renames him Peter. And as followers of Jesus, we each have our first encounter with Jesus, that time when Jesus became real to us, and he called us by name, and it felt personal. And then in the storm, Peter walks on water, and we have moments in our journey where we brave the storm, and we trust that Jesus is with us. And in the garden, Peter draws the sword, and we have moments where we're ready to fight for Jesus. We want to fight for what we believe in. And in the courtyard, Peter denies Jesus, and we all have moments of disillusionment, discouragement, disbelief. A moment like Peter where we come undone. When Jesus called Peter, he knew his whole story. He knew that he would doubt and deconstruct, and he called him anyway. He knew that there was going to be some ideas and hopes that Peter would construct about Jesus that he would have to let go of. But he meets him in the middle of all that anyway. And Peter's final stage of his deconstruction journey finds him on the beach, face to face with the resurrected Christ. And Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." And then the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him for the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Jesus was waiting for Peter on the beach. And he asked Peter 3 times to reaffirm his love for him. No matter our doubts and deconstruction, Jesus is always waiting for us. And when we move away from God, God always moves towards us. Jesus came to the beach where Peter would be. Wherever you are on this journey, Jesus is still chasing after you. He's waiting for you. He's asking you, "Do you love me? Will you continue to follow me? Do you still believe that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God, the provider of hope and peace, that I'm still moving, that I'm still good, that I'm still working?" If you find yourself in a moment of questioning and doubting and wondering, your first step, simplify everything. Go back to the place where you first encountered Jesus. Listen, don't mix up your faith with a lot of rules, politics, opinions, behaviors. No, at the end of all that, whether you agree or disagree on all the details with others who call themselves Christian, the bottom line is this: what do you make of Jesus? How does an encounter with the real Jesus impact your life? Go back to a time, a moment when Jesus first felt real to you. Listen for him again. That time when he was loud and clear, that time when he felt personal. And remember how you felt. Remember what you thought. Remember how Jesus made himself real to you. Go back to that place and sit in that place. Find that place and keep meeting Jesus there. Because what if deconstruction is the tool for us to finally be honest about our faith, where we can lay down all that's not true and discover what's real?